right, we're back, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the Biblical Hitman. I'm your host, Steven, here with Jesse. I'm here with Taylor. And for the first time, we have the author of the Genesis 6 Conspiracy, Gary Wayne. And you got 2 books out now, right, Gary?
I do, and it's been out for about a year, and it is still doing very darn well, so very pleased with the product.
Awesome. So I can't wait to touch on both of these books a little bit today, because I think we're going to be bouncing around back and forth from a couple of different concepts throughout your book. But I'm excited for this, man. It's been a little bit since we scheduled it, but we're here, man. But folks, if it's your first time or if you're returning, and you haven't done so already, hit that subscribe button, like the show, share it with your friends. And please check us out on audio platforms. You can check us out on Spotify. You can check us out on Spreaker and Apple Podcasts. But Gary, thanks for coming on to the show, man, giving us some of your time.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm so happy to be here and to talk to your audience, and really hoping that we'll connect some dots and at the same time maybe permanently roll up some eyebrows.
Yeah. I mean, you definitely do that with the work that you've put in with both of your books. I haven't gone through the second book yet. The first one, I'm sorry, it's 800 or so pages, right?
Correct.
It's a piece of art. I wanted to kind of but before we get into the backstory behind making this a little bit, just tell the audience a little bit about yourself and where they could find your work.
Yeah, so I think the first thing that the audience should know about me is I view myself as a Christian contrarian. And I came about coming back to Christ through the research and a challenge to a book that I took as a challenge to read by the late Hal Inslee in his late Great Planet Earth book, and the prophecy in there just scared the socks off of me. So, and I was a contrarian before that as well. So, and when I talk about myself being a contrarian, is that I don't accept what somebody says, what somebody says something says, what somebody says something they saw. I tend to want to verify it for myself. And so I do that with my research outside the Bible and inside the Bible. And everything I research outside the Bible, I measure up against inside the Bible, and where it strays, I note that, and I don't use that for a basis of my conclusions, but it's interesting. But so if people want to talk about it, I probably know about it. So what that tends to do, though, is it puts me in the standard crosshairs of the mainstream dogmatics out there. So, and I'm kind of swimming upstream because I find that a lot of doctrine, a lot of theology, a lot of theory, what people say something says is incorrect when it comes to the Bible, and it's not as accurate as it ought to be. And so those are some of the things that I tend to focus on. And one of the reasons why I focus on those types of things and to be able to know those types of things, because I don't believe the Bible contradicts itself. And so if that's the case and you find something that you think is in contradiction, probably somebody's told you that, as opposed to doing the research yourself. It should just be a red flag to say I need to dig deeper on something, and you'll find the answers. The Bible does not conflict itself, even though people will say that. Even Christians will say that, which is they've really bought into the brainwashing on that. But that is what the polytheists do, who know the Bible better than most Christians.
Right.
And they'll bring in those tactics on the arguments to seed doubt and try and get gaps into your face. So that's the motivation for what I do. And so it was the challenge that got me into writing these books. And I started the books after about 15 or 16 years worth of researching the Bible. And I matched that up with my knowledge of history and mythology that I was obsessed with when I was growing up. And so I decided to see whether or not I could write a book on some prophecy, because that's how I came back to Christ and started this line of research. But I'm not a theologian. I'm not a minister. I don't have a university degree of any sort and no platform. So writing a book is one thing. Getting it published is another. Having anybody read it is still another, let alone buy it, and let alone say it might be something I might recommend to somebody or give it a good rating. So I thought I would do something really easy, and I would start with connecting a topic on that I didn't want to have anything to do with it when I first started mapping the Bible in terms of the prophecy narratives and all these different files. And you get there in Genesis 6 pretty quick. And that was sort of my cognizant dissonance that I didn't want to handle with, but once I decided to deal with it, I could look at a lot of other things differently, and it's one of those Rosetta Stones for the Bible. So I left it, but I came back as I was documenting it and saying, giants, they're talked about more than in Genesis 6. They're somehow connected to fallen angels. They're somehow connected to demons, and we see this show up in prophecy. So why don't I just do something really easy and fun? And let's just do a very short, quick book, and let's connect Genesis 6 to end time prophecy and see whether I can actually write a story that's a narrative that is not a fiction, right? And tell a bigger story. But I did the first 10 chapters very quickly, and then I realized that my understanding of history and mythology and legends, that these were common stories throughout the world as part of our common history, just seen through a polytheist lens versus the monotheist lens, perhaps counterfeited, but more likely a polytheist version of the same events. And so I thought, well, I'll include some of that. That was pretty easy. But then I realized, well, if I'm kind of targeting Christians as my main audience here, although I'm trying to bring polytheists and agnostics and seculars to read the book in the Bible, read the Bible, and to come back to Christ, hopefully. I better give a little more context because the culture is important, and that's the religion. So now I have to learn all about the religions, and that takes many years, several years. And so I have to read everything from the Vedas to the Quran to the Popol Vuh to all the Gnostic Gospels, Book of Mormon, you name it. I had to read it to make sure I had the context and could put it in the context of the narratives. So then I realized that, particularly after reading all of these polytheist versions, that they have this common connection of these mystery schools. So I have to learn about mystery schools. And I don't know anything about mystery schools. I just know about schools. And so then I realized that the secret societies take their beginnings back to the beginning of mysticism and specifically to the start of the mystery schools. And so I don't know anything about secret societies. So now I got to go down those rabbit holes. And I'm down there for about 8 to 10 years. And you could be
Oh,
down there
wow.
forever. It's that big of a topic. So by the time I get my book ready to go, it's like 30 years, like in the making for book one. So that's how I came about it. And I wanted to connect the dots on a 6,000-year narrative of our state of being and why we're here. And I didn't think there was any book out there like that. And as it turned out, I was correct. And so it's one of the most unique books that people are ever going to read. And then book two is just as unique, but from a Christian perspective. So it's book one on steroids, and it goes so deep into the Bible, it goes quite a bit beyond what Dr. Heiser's work was, like way beyond.
Really?
And I'm using comments coming back from people who have read the book and saying, we really like what you did because that just fits perfectly with what his work was doing, but to a level that we couldn't connect all the dots. And Dr. Heiser was working more from a Judaic perspective, and I'm doing Judeo-Christian perspective, total monotheism, and showing how the New Testament works in companion with the Old Testament at the same time. So it is as unique as book one as well. And the only thing I promised about book two, and I said I would never write book two because I didn't want to be redundant, but I learned how to write it and based on communication with the audience as to why they wanted me to do more research in this area, but more biblically based. The only thing I guaranteed in book two was it would be shorter than book one, which it is, but it's still over 700 pages.
You got them. You got them. You got them there. That's awesome. Maybe a few weeks less of reading with that.
Yes.
One thing about
you
your
probably realized when you're reading it, you can't speed read it. There's too much information.
You can't. You hit it right on the head because every line in your book at least the first one. This is the one I'm going through right now.
Book 2 is the same.
Every line. Oh, nice. Every line is information, so it's not more like storytelling. It's more. It's just more. They're like punches. They're just like
Yep.
jabs. Bam,
Yep.
bam, bam,
Yeah,
bam.
and all I'm doing is stitching it together in a manner that sort of makes sense, hopefully,
Right, right. And
as
I
opposed to
like.
being a crazy person.
Right, right. I like how at the end of each chapter you kind of draw everything that you just got done laying out.
Yeah.
You kind of draw it all in together. I enjoy that a lot. And so, but take
And
us
yet,
down.
I was just
Go
going
ahead.
to say, just for people who might be intimidated on the size of the books and the amount of the information, is that each chapter is a little mini story and it's 4 or 5 pages long. And so you can read it at your speed and read one chapter at a time. And a lot of people don't even read it in order. I mean, I recommend you read it in order, but because they're mini stories, you can just say, okay, there's a chapter on the Rosicrucians. I'd like to maybe read about that or whatever grabs your interest from the table of contents. So I tried to make it as easy as possible, but it's a journey. It's not
Right,
something you're going to do in a weekend or on a
right.
vacation.
Are
Well,
you on
and
audio as well?
Yes, I had audio come out finally. It was a story of perseverance in itself, because of the size of the project and the complication of the project and the types of words and things that people aren't familiar with. That I wasn't able for a long time to get people to actually produce it. Everybody loved the idea of doing it, but they're just looking at, high cost.
Right.
What's the expected return? But things have really changed on the audio market where some people are saying it's bigger than the print market now. So
No
it could be
doubt.
the biggest market. So there was a company that came along and said, yeah, we know all about this, but we're good at this. We know how to do this and we want to do it. So before somebody else gets to us. So that we did.
very well.
Yeah. So both came out last year. So in September, book 1 came out, and then in December, book 2 came out. And they started on book 1 in about April or May. And so they finished the project at the end of December. So that's a long time to do a
Yeah.
book
Did
like
you
this.
have somebody else read?
I did. I
Okay.
did. 2 things is I didn't have time, and
Right.
probably, I was looking for somebody who was experienced at this,
Right.
and I didn't want to be learning. And you get into the middle of a chapter and it gets mucked up. It's really hard to get that same pace back and pick up just by splicing. So
No doubt.
you have to be good at what you do, I think. And that was probably, it's something I could have done, but I don't think I would have done nearly as good a job myself.
Right,
Not
right.
even in the same ballpark.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Gary, take us down a journey a little bit. Because at the bottom of your book here on the title, it says how secret societies and the descendants of giants plan to enslave humankind. I know that statement is very broad, right? So,
It is, and it's quite provocative,
right,
let alone the word conspiracy after Genesis 6. And so, the subtitle on book 2 is how understanding prehistory and giants helps you to understand end time prophecy. Well, that's going to blow people's heads too, especially with all these different approaches on eschatology and things like that. So those are put in there to not only sort of sum up what the book is about, but to get you thinking right out of the gate that either this is going to be so weird that I'm never going to read it
Yeah.
after the first chapter, if I,
right.
or it's going to be something that I need to pay attention to. So it is a 6,000 year book. One is a 6,000 year investigation into what I call the House of Dragon.
Wow.
And it is literally spanning that amount of time and a little bit more because of some of the references I might make to before Genesis 6. So in the book, but essentially in that group. And it is following the reason why we're created, who has been trying to stop us from achieving our destiny, and what are those reasons for doing that?
That's
And of
incredible.
course, it ends in the future because it goes right into the end time.
Right. Right.
And so what people don't know for the most part, particularly if they're not familiar with my work, is that when we talk about Genesis 6, this is one of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of stories around the world. The flood story is in 500 different cultures around the world.
Wow.
Right.
It's on every continent around the world except for Antarctica, and who knows what we find in Antarctica down the road. So it's
Right.
part of
Big
our
question
common
mark there.
legacy. And in about 80 to 90% of those accounts are giants
Right.
that everybody wants to wish away because nobody wants to deal with that whole ideology. You can't have that type of coincidence. It's not mathematically possible to have all these disparate cultures around the world talking about the same events with the same players, just
Right.
seen through a polytheist lens versus the monotheist lens.
Right.
It's
Right.
just not possible. So what's going on here? And that's what we're talking about. And, right from the creation of Adam, and after the angelic rebellion, which is kind of the context for the whole story, in
Now,
that the Adam,
real quick. So, like, this is a rebellion that is something different than Revelation 12, correct?
yeah, Revelation 12 is getting to the denouement of the rebellion.
Right. Right. It's like
And
almost the last.
yeah, so what Revelation does, which is really kind of nice, is it's what a term that I call a dual prophecy. And it's a prophecy like Isaiah 14 or Ezekiel 28, and there's a whole bunch of different ones like this. And they give you important information on prehistory. And there's events that are going to be for the time of the prophet. And then there's aspects that's for the end time. So, and it's a vision prophecy as well. So it's the most complex prophecy in the Bible. And so you have a third of the angels that are thrown down. Well, that's the third that rebelled, likely all at once, but you could make a case. It's hard to make it for biblical references, but you could make a good case that they, have been rebelling ever since. But again, we don't get that smoking gun verse that would suggest that. But what you can say for sure is by the midpoint of the last 7 years, and we get the timing of that in Revelation 12, a full third of them are going to have rebelled. And it was likely, most of them, I would say all of them, again, we don't have scripture for it, but that seems to be the inference as we go through the Bible on that. And, all at once, but after Satan had rebelled, because he's the first in Ezekiel 28. So when I look at that rebellion, doesn't really matter where you place it, because it's still a context, but you have to place it at least by the time of Adam. I would suggest before that,
Right.
based
Right.
on who the Nahash serpent is, and the context of what's going on. But at that time, that's what I talk about in book 1 in chapter 13 is Lucifer's revenge. Like, he is not going to permit humankind to be raised up to be like angels, even though we have human fathers in the future time through the resurrection. He didn't know how that was going to happen. We know that because in 1 Corinthians, it clearly says that the princes, which is Greek for arche for archons, that if they had known about the resurrection, they wouldn't have had him crucified. So that was
Right.
always going to be the plan. And the Adamites are the resolution to the angelic rebellion.
Right.
And so that starts the whole interplay. And the giants are created to keep the blood off the fallen angelic hands, so to speak, and let their spurious offspring do all the dirty work. And so biblically, you don't even hear about fallen angels slandering God.
Right. Right.
You only hear about their offspring who do it, that have, they're compared to spiritual beasts, and that language is very specific. We should take note of, and the followers of the pantheon. So they use the followers and their demigod offspring to do the dirty work and to wipe humankind from the face of the earth. Their goal before the flood was to wipe us right from the face of the earth. And that's why they provided all of the technology that we're just catching up to this day. So if it should give people pause to read 2 Peter 3 a little closer, where you have this world that was in the beginning, that was in the water, out of the water, that was destroyed by fire, and the fire is reserved for the end time destruction, right? So there's a connection to in the beginning and the end time destruction by fire, and it's the whole destruction that basically happens in end time prophecy is the destruction by fire. So we now have that capability to destroy the world by fire. And if nothing is new under the sun, as Ecclesiastic talks about, and what was will be again, that we're cycling these same types of events through, and the understanding of this only brings grief and sorrow. I mean, let that sink in to the veracity of why we need to understand what happened in prehistory. Then God probably has said that I am going to have the flood come, whether it's he's bringing the flood or he permits the fallen angels to do it. And do keep in mind, for Christians who are tired of being beaten up saying the God of the Bible is evil because he brought the flood, in all of the polytheist accounts, it's the fallen angels who bring the flood. So however it comes about, God permits it. So you can make your own decision on that, but just for a clarification point on why we should know the Bible better than the polytheists, and we should know a little bit about them as well. So he brings the flood, or permits the flood through the fallen angels to do it, because the level of technology that is provided has planet capability destruction by fire. And what's interesting is in the polytheist accounts that come out of the Gnostics and the secret societies is they know this disaster is coming. They just don't know whether it's fire or water. So in the Polychronicon, in the histories of Freemasonry, that takes their creation back to before the flood, into the descendants of Cain and its initial creation of the secret societies and the mystical religions, they create two pillars that has some very important information they want passed on to the post-Diluvian epoch, but more importantly, the direction to all the knowledge that they're going to store in 9 vaults underneath the Great Pyramid.
Right. And now is Enoch and Lamech, right? Are they
those are the 2 pillars. So they have
right? Okay.
2 pillars. They have 2 accounts of that. And it's hard to know whether it's Enoch or it is Lamech. It's probably Lamech, because Enoch, we're only told in the book of Enoch to be living to 500 years old. And certainly that's not Enoch, son of Jared. And I think there's a corruption there that the polytheists have put some of their markers into the book of Enoch, because Enoch, son of Jared, was taken at 365. So he's not 500 years old.
Right.
So it's either, when you look at when he's born, 500 years is not possible unless he lives a lot longer than that, until the time of the flood comes. There's a few more 100 years to play out on the chronology. So I think it's probably more like the Pillars of Lamech. But either or, the stories are pretty much identical, and that they create 2 pillars. One is designed to float. So it's designed to survive the flood, but the other one is designed to survive destruction by fire. So it's obviously when Hermes, part of the Hermes Trismegistus, finds this pillar, according to that account, after the flood, he's finding the one that survived the flood, the one that could float. And he finds the knowledge, and then he takes it back to Nimrod at Babel, which starts to really sort of get intriguing in terms of how you see the polytheist accounts or interweaving on the same events into the Bible, but adding their own details, whether accurate or not.
Right. Exactly.
And why do you think they did that, to mix everything up, to mix the information up from the truth? Why do you think they did that?
Because of the Roman Church. I think the information that they have came down well before the time of Christ. And so this is ancient knowledge. So the only reason that you're going to conflate the 2 Enochs, which is what they do, and try and do everything with a veil of Christianity, just as you have a standard MO there for secret societies. So like Freemasonry has the adepts, at the top of that organization, at the bottom of the hierarchy of the Thelemic trunk. And everybody underneath are initiates, and they're climbing up that to be first level of adept, right? So that's
Right.
to give the adepts the ability to hide behind that camouflage and do all the things that they want to do in secret and behind the scenes. So that's what they're continually wanting to do. So if they can sort of conflate and draft in biblical patriarchs to being their own, they're not going to be persecuted by the Roman Church, who had a history of doing that and were sworn enemies for, most of their existence. So that's why they did it. And it also helps to mislead Christians to say, hey, we're good guys. We've just been slandered by, radical rogue literalists.
Right. It's almost like a wolf in sheep's clothing aspect.
It is. That's exactly, and why we should look at those imageries that the Bible provides us, and not just as, oh, that's kind of poetic or whatever. It's like, no, they're telling us in that statement what their organizational structure is. And just as Satan masquerades as an angel of life, and all of his ministers and followers do the same, and all of these religions call themselves the children of light, and Satan is a good god, and God is the evil god. The language is there for us if we understand it in the context, which is why it's so disappointing that the churches do not teach prehistory and they do not teach end-time prophecy.
Exactly.
Teach good values, but not the context.
Yeah, and that's the basis of Freemasonry right there too. They just basically believe that, Lucifer's the good guy, God's the big old bad guy, and he just wants to restrict us, but he's just trying to protect us from all this evil,
Yeah. And what the heck is Lucifer doing in the KJV Bible?
Ooh.
Right.
I mean, and so if people don't know what I'm talking about, I do that just to grab people's attention. Lucifer is the god of the secret societies and Gnostics. It's one of the names, and it comes from a set of Latin words like lux and light bearer and Venus, and all words that are associated in the original Latin. But here's what's interesting: is you have a Latin word inserted into English for a Hebrew word, which makes no sense. So what's the Hebrew there? It's Halel ben Shakar. Halel, son of the morning.
Morning star.
And by the way, doesn't say Satan there is the morning star. He's the son of the morning. Jesus is the morning star.
Right.
And
exactly.
Venus is only a morning star for 6 months of the year, whereas it is an evening star for the other 6 months of the year. So that whole BS on the imagery there is manipulated and, again, designed to seed faith issues within Christianity. So Hellel, Heylel, is also the derivative word for Hellel, which is not used in the Bible anywhere as an allegory for the king of Babylon, which helps you to understand Isaiah 14. And king of Babylon never tried to go into heaven, or never made it into heaven to try and raise his throne up. That's Satan. But Hellel, as the king of Babylon, is a beast empire and an Antichrist wannabe, and it's Antichrist who actually gets that done in the end time in Daniel 8:10 and Revelation 12, same timing. So when we look at Hellel, why is it just not translated as Hellel? Instead of what they do is they say, well, let's get the meaning of boasting and proud and light, because it goes back to 2 words on its Hebrew etymology, and then we'll just substitute Lucifer in there because we can make an Italian justification for it. You don't do that with Michael or Gabriel. We just get the name. Why would we do it there? It's an excuse by however it comes about. We don't have to debate how it came about because it's a long story, but it's a marker.
Yeah.
It should not be in there.
Yeah, it's obvious. It's obvious it was used to could create the confusion to switch the good guy and the bad guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's what makes me a contrarian.
Right.
I'm going, what the heck is that doing in the KJV Bible?
Yeah. Everything about these mystery schools is very interesting as well. How they've traditionally passed it on. I mean, even just in our day today,
Well, yeah. So you have secret societies that, if people aren't familiar with a term called the seven sacred sciences, it's important for people to understand. And this is the knowledge that they believe that Adam was provided in Eden to run this massive agricultural plantation, so to speak. I mean, it goes from the Nile to the Euphrates, from Mount Hermon to the Sea of Aqaba, the Red Sea, and Indian Ocean, right? And you get those dimensions by understanding the rivers that they're talking about. And the same land that Abraham is promised in Genesis 15. So this is a huge place, and there's just Adam. And then sometime later, because I'll be careful with this, because no suitable partner could be found.
There you go.
Eve was created to help him, but now you still only have two. So if you get back into the Hebrew of what's being said there, and it's not said very clear, they're planting grasses, which is wheat and barley and flax. It's grasses like that. They have massive orchards there. They are raising domesticated animals. They are the first agrarians. And so to do that, you have to have a lot of knowledge. Right? Because you have no other helpers. So you have, and it's a huge area. So you'd have to have a lot of knowledge. So this knowledge gets passed on to Cain and Abel and then Seth. And Abel is obviously killed by Cain. So it's Cain who takes this knowledge and never forgives God and develops it into a different application. Instead of just for good, now it's going to be for whatever he wants. Sometimes good, lots of times bad, right?
So he's considered basically the first false light Freemason.
Not quite, close to it. He's very important. Enoch, son of Cain, would be the first sort of major patriarch. Adam is more considered in a priest-king type manner versus the first sort of grand master or founder of Masonry. So what?
Yeah, because I've heard that before. I've heard people call Adam the first Freemason.
Yeah, I mean, technically you can, because he's developing that knowledge, but it's Enoch that takes it into the seven sciences and starts this massive development of it. The seven sciences are the same as liberal arts today. So you have, like math and arithmetic, astronomy, rhetoric, grammar. So the seven basic principles. And the fifth science of geometry is also known as masonry, which who the Freemasons specialize in. So when the seven sciences are being developed, they're going to create a sun worshiping and bull cult by Enoch, son of Cain, not Enoch, son of Jared, of the Sethian line. And he's going to put all of this knowledge that's being developed into this mystical sun cult that I call Enochian mysticism, which is the same religion that crosses the flood and is introduced to Nimrod that he uses at Babel, which is why Babel is the root word for Babylon in end time prophecy for the universal religion. It's that ancient religion, and it's a mystery religion. And so they create this initiatory degree system within mysticism because it's a knowledge religion. And so to educate the top two classes, because after the fallen angels provide additional knowledge that take the seven sciences to a whole new level very quickly, and with the introduction of the giants in Genesis 6, who's going to usurp all the governments around the world, they usurp the top two classes that they now enforce onto the world, and they're going to populate the governing class, all of the educated classes as the elites or the elim or the elites, if you want to look at it that way. And people aren't familiar with El, that's the Hebrew word for a god or an angel in the lower case, and God Most High in the uppercase.
Right, and this connects with royal, right? Royale.
Yeah, royale, kings of God. Yeah.
All that. It's so fascinating, man.
Yeah.
It's so fascinating.
And so they, they're the ones who are the generals and the colonels and all the officers in the army. And if that's sounding familiar, that's what's going on in the world today. And a very small group at the top is that 1% that we still have talked about, who have most of the money and most of the power. But the first two classes is the larger nobility. or Aryan. Indo-Aryan giants, get used to those as being the same terms, and Aryan means noble, right? They are the nobility. They don't hide their titles in terms of how they describe themselves. They also populate all of the priest class, and they only want the bloodlines of the giants as spurious offspring of the celestial mafia godfathers, as I like to call them. They're only going to educate those people of the nobility.
Right.
And the bottom two classes where humans will be, and we will have, when we're lucky and fortunate, we will have a small entrepreneurial position, let's say in old times like a blacksmith or a baker or a tailor, so small business today. And then the fourth class is the slave and labor class. And so that's the same system that we have today. And they've held that system through their size in the beginning as giants and then control of all the land. So the royals of England, they had probably the most clearest model that we could see, where 1% of the population owned 99% of the land and owned all of the oligarch companies.
Wow.
So like corporations today.
Yeah.
Oh
So
my
when we
goodness.
look at that being coming out of the mystery schools, only the elite are being educated, which is the same thing that was going on till, let's say the last 150 years at or so on that time frame. And so they developed these specialized secret societies that were part of the initiated mystical religion to develop, like Masonry for building and architecture, and they developed those sciences. Well, you roll that forward to this day, we look at a university campus. Most of them are using beast empire architecture from Egypt, Babylon, Rome, Greece.
Right.
Everything that goes on in the seven liberal arts is honoring the pantheon of gods with their names and everything like that. And the goal of the mystical religion was to lead people away from God, to not give God credit for anything, to discredit God or slander God, and fourth was to honor the pantheon of gods. So that's everything that goes on the campus today. It's in a degree system. So you'll get an engineering degree, a PhD. They're all degrees, different levels of education on the polytheist mystery school system.
Right.
Yeah.
And that when you're going to graduate, you're going to wear these black Cathar garbs.
The black
in a
cube.
ritual.
Yeah, Saturn worship.
And then you're going to get a literal document, a legal document with that degree. And you've probably done several oaths as you were educated on that, which you do in the mystical religions as well. Like they're just duplicating everything in plain sight. And most people
really.
And they have such a controlled system too, because even to this day, I mean, college is kind of fading out in a way where there's a lot more entrepreneurs and a lot more ways to make money elsewhere than rather go to a university. But it's just funny how they created a system where you have to go through that, because that's these big corporations that the royals own still to this day. They require you to have that degree to go through the indoctrination to even get into the corporation.
Absolutely. It's
funny.
just it's their system. And
Right.
we need to understand that. And so now they also have, which is the direct parallel to the secret societies, which are these educational societies that were developed that Freemasonry takes their origins back to. And you have these initiatory clubs that are on campuses. And you have to be invited to go in. There's an initiation.
Right.
And the reason why you have to be invited is, again, they're looking for people of the bloodlines, because it's a built-in system for the most part. And so, but they may be more lower level as Alpha House or Beta House, but you get to the Ivy League now you're going to get pseudo blue blood line organizations, and the most famous would be the Skull and Bones.
Right.
Yeah, which would go into the Illuminati on the Thelemic tree.
Right. What is it? 322? Is that
3.
the number? Is it 322 or is it? I forget what it is.
I believe it's 322.
Skull and Bones number.
I think you're right.
George Bush
something
was
like
in
that.
it too.
I know.
Of
And well,
course.
I mean, I even think, what is it?
They even have the emblems of the Illuminati, and then they have the skull and bones,
Right,
which is
right.
the flag of the Templars and their navy once they were disbanded.
Oh yeah, and
Right.
they're for the most part responsible of putting people, politicians in office and all this other kind of stuff. And
Yeah, so if you're Skull and Bones, I mean, they're feeding all the major political organizations, the people, and that's the first stepping stone. So again,
Right.
it's a
right,
very closed society. Doesn't mean that some people might break through,
Right.
but it's rare.
Yeah, they're big in the Navy too, right? And the
Yeah.
Marines is kind of like a lower class that the Navy kind of looks down on. Have you heard that the Navy's a real big part of Skull and Bones as well?
Well, yes, it typically if when you have Skull and Bones interacting with military, they're out of their normal realm.
Hmm.
So that's not their agenda.
Hmm.
But there's and it may be that they were more the sponsors and why they have the influence. It's Freemasonry that is in charge of politics in the army at the lower level,
Hmm.
and so Illuminati is the next step up
Right.
on that Thelemic tree trunk order. So yeah, it's an interesting mix, and the Navy is something that it wasn't a big part of the ancient history. So the more ancient organizations sort of specialized on the land operations, but over time the Navy gets stronger and stronger. So
Right.
um, so they put really the same system in place, though, right?
hmm
It's the same. They have maybe different names for some of the ranks, but they're
Oh yeah.
cognate positions to what would be on the land. And
right.
there's more of an association with sea gods and Leviathan,
Hmm.
and on the land would be more, sort of a Behemoth sort of allegorical relationship, and sort of little things like that you could look at. But typically, everything in the military is supposed to be the realm of Freemasonry.
Hmm. Okay. Yeah, I know
Wow.
there's a lady that came out. She was the ex-wife of a high-ranking general or captain, and she did a tell-all. This was years ago. I think it's still on YouTube, but it's like a 4-hour tell-all, and she's saying some really weird stuff that these guys, and it comes from Skull and Bones traditions. Their rituals that they would perform in like caskets, and it's some weird stuff, man. Real weird stuff.
Yeah, so I mean, the Illuminati is their main goal is to bring down Christianity and to work on the world government aspect of it.
Right. Makes
Right.
sense.
Which is coming along,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I may
so
say.
so the Illuminati, once the Freemasons had their lodges set up most around the world, they would work out of there, but they'd be considered higher on the degree system than a Masonic or Freemason adept is.
Hmm.
Fascinating. Fascinating. I wanted to get your take on, things like the pyramids and these ancient ziggurats and everything like that.
Yeah.
Where that kind of plays in, is it antediluvian period? Is it, after? What are your thoughts on all that?
Yeah, my opinion is um, there's no way that these buildings were built after the flood. So
Right.
we get an
Right.
interesting timetable of Khufu and Khafra, who are basically the pharaohs that they say in standard Egyptian and secular chronology built the pyramids. I think they did a renovation job after the flood. I mean, if you
Right.
look at between 23 to 2400, you're in biblical chronology time frame of the flood, and you
Right.
would have to do a restoration after something like that. When we have the stela of Menes and Narma, same king, different names, you see the 52-degree slope of the Great Pyramid in the background on that. So
Right.
that
Right.
that by their same chronology and the dating is 2950 to 3050 BC. So we're talking about something, and even though he's the first pharaoh after the flood, um, you have these same descriptions and references to the pyramids in Sumeria that are before the flood as well, and before the time of many. So
Fascinating.
I think it's antediluvian and
Right.
significantly older than what people tell us that they
Right.
are. And
So you're not a young Earth theory guy.
I'm fine either way, but I lean heavily to an older Earth.
Right. So do I.
Because I don't like the Bible being in conflict. And so I think it's a bit also, there's a couple of ways that you can make the Earth older biblically.
Okay, do tell.
Well, we look just at the days 1 through 7. Then we have the Adam account.
Right.
People
So
say
it was
that's like
7,000 years, right? For the creation, and then Adam.
Yeah, so you have at least that,
Right.
right? And we know that because a day is like 1,000 years
Right.
in Second Peter again, which is a great passage to understand what was going on before. It's also another dual prophecy, and people will say, well, but we get 24 hours as a day defined in Genesis 1. So how do you say that? Well, it's not that hard if you think about it, because most people would say, well, yeah, so that it's just an allegory. It's just giving us a frame of reference to how powerful God is as an immortal and things. But that's not what's going on. A light is introduced to the world as the first thing after would be, in this scenario, what I would call a renewal of the earth, as Psalms 104:30 talks about. When God sends his Holy Spirit, the earth is renewed. And guess who's there in Genesis 1:2? The Holy Spirit hovering over this chaos.
Interesting.
And then we have the light. God creates the light in.
Right.
So now what you're saying is that the earth was.
But the light isn't the sun and the moon there.
Right.
That comes in about day 4.
This is what Craig Hunt was saying.
But
That's exactly what I was just going to go into. So basically, the earth was like destroyed to some extent, and then
it was void, right? Yes,
void.
It was void. Yeah.
Yes. So just let me get there.
Right.
Otherwise,
Getting
people
excited.
will say, well, they're talking through their hats here.
Right.
So,
Right.
So the light isn't, and even at the end of day 1, it says after the creation of light, that's the end of day 1, but there's no sun or moon. And Jesus said, and you have to put John 1 and John 8 together to understand Genesis 1 in many aspects. He is the light. So he's being inserted into it. And when God speaks in Genesis 1, Elohim Amar is the Hebrew. So that's God, and the word of God is the speech. And he's also the light. And we also have the Ruach of the Elohim there as well. So we get introduced to Jesus in 2:4, Genesis 2:4, as Lord God, or Jehovah of the Elohim, which is the same term as the word logos of the God Theos in the New Testament. And he's the light. And everything sort of starts to make some sense. And we understand who Jehovah is now versus El in uppercase, singular, or Elohim in the uppercase, singular, or Elion as God Most High. That's the Father that Jesus is referring to, right? And the Ruach is the Spirit of God. So now we sort of understand what's going on here. And if the earth is being renewed from what? Right. And so now we look at the in Genesis 1:2 is it says that, in paraphrasing some of it here, the earth was without form and void, or formless, depending on which translation that you're reading. Well, that's interesting. Well, what's that word was? Well, it's the Hebrew word haya. And the Hebrew word haya can be translated as was, is, or became. So now what's the right translation there? So now we go and look at the two words that follow, which are bohu and tuhu, or tuhu and bohu, and get them in the right order here. And they both mean to become ruined, destroyed, a wasteland. So, but just because you have that there that infers a destruction, the verb is really still important there. So does God create anything unfinished? Well, people would say, well, that's why you have days 1 through 6, right? That's because he wasn't finished his work. But in Genesis 1:1, it says he created the heavens and the earth. It didn't say he partly created it.
Right.
So then we say, okay, it's disputable, it's arguable. You could go one way or the other, depending on how you want to reconcile it. But Isaiah 45 is a passage that you can't reconcile. In Isaiah 45, it says, God does not create anything in vain. He creates everything to be lived in, right? So that in itself, without getting into the meaning, is saying he wouldn't create it in chaos, right? As form, without form and void. And that word vain is the Hebrew word tuhu again.
Okay.
Right? So he doesn't create anything without form or with, because if it's not made to be lived in by the context of Isaiah 45, it'd be vanity. I wish they did a better translation, a fuller translation there.
Right.
And then when you look at 2 Peter 3, where it has this in the beginning reference, the earth that was in the water, that was out of the water, that was perished by fire, that's reserved for the end time. Well, most people think that's the flood, except it doesn't make any sense based on what's said in Genesis, because in the flood story, only the land life was killed, except for the 8 and the animals on the ark. Not everything in the sea, not everything in the air. So the world didn't perish. So what's it talking about? Well, back in the beginning, the world perished somehow by fire.
Right.
So if you now place the angelic rebellion in there, which would be a good source for what could destroy the world by fire through this technology, and nothing is new under the sun, what was will be again.
Right.
That sort of will be repeating as we go through history and then come to a fruition in the end time. You now have a better place, I think, for the angelic rebellion. And if they destroyed the earth down to the foundations, just as in Psalms 104 that I talked about earlier, you have the creation of the angels at the beginning. You have the reference to the foundations. Go over to Job and the destruction down to the foundations. And in Job's 38, 4 through 7, you have during the time of the creation of the foundations, the sons of God and the morning stars were celebrating.
Right.
If you destroyed the world that totally by fire, it would be destroyed down to those foundations, because the foundations are forever. They cannot be destroyed. And if that happened, the waters that were above that creates the firmament collapsed onto the waters below. And so if you're going to renew the earth and create life underneath it, you're going to have to separate the waters below from the waters above to create the firmament, which is called heaven in Genesis 1 as well. And some people will point to Exodus 20:18 and says, well, it clearly says heaven and earth were created in 6 days and God rested on the seventh day.
Right.
So there goes your theory. Well, that word heaven, both in anywhere you have it within the Old Testament, is the Hebrew word shemaim. It's in the plural. It's never in the singular form in Shema. And it means 3 different places. It means where God dwells in the spirit realm. It means what's outside the firmament as the second heaven. And then in the other heaven is what's underneath the firmament. So what is Exodus really referring to? Probably the firmament, because that's what is called heaven, that's created when you separated the waters in Genesis 1. So it's not in conflict. Your understanding may be in conflict because you're working from a preconceived conclusion of what Genesis 1 says, and I get that, but that's not necessarily what the Hebrew says or the rest of the Bible says.
Right.
Then all of a sudden you have all of these passages throughout the Bible which seem out of sorts, now fitting in perfectly.
So many different cross references.
Yeah.
Tens of thousands. It's incredible.
Right. Right. I
Yeah,
mean, and you know that there's so many parallels with Genesis and the ancient Sumerian epics.
Hmm.
yeah,
For example, we've had a guy on who's basically done a whole slideshow and shown certain things. Um, and it's crazy because it makes me think about after the flood, makes me think about Ham, makes me
yeah.
think about like uh Göbekli, what is it, Globeki Tepe
Gobekli Tepe.
Gobekli Tepe, yeah.
or
I
something
screw
like
it
that,
up
right?
all the time. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a hard one. Thank you for that. That's tongue twister. And then everything that the movement after that, right? Babel, Nimrod, and all that kind of stuff. What are your thoughts with like Nimrod and his, um, you know, he there's a lot of comparison with him and Gilgamesh,
Mm.
and Gilgamesh being, a demigod, Nimrod, you know, possibly being a demigod. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's an interesting comparison, and a lot of people have conflated Nimrod and Gilgamesh. What we do know is Nimrod is third generation after the flood, and we know from Sumerian Kings list, um, Gilgamesh is sixth generation, and we know he's son of Lugobanda and the fertility goddess Nin. So he's a created giant after the flood,
Right.
according to the Epic of Gilgamesh. So that doesn't really sort of match up.
Hmm.
And there was another epic that was called the Legends of Idzubar, where Idzubar is thought to be Gilgamesh as well, and that was done through Smith. And that's where he equated the two, and then by overlap, then because it's the same story, Gilgamesh gets overlapped on it, and that's how that sort of comes about. And both Nimrod and Gilgamesh are both depicted as dark hair, these big bushy
Right.
beards.
Right, right.
But Itzubar is exactly the same tale and has the
Same tale.
same
Interesting.
details.
Very interesting.
So it's not in conflict with the Epic of Gilgamesh. There's just a different transliterated name from a different language, right?
Right.
Right.
So there is one individual in the Sumerian kings list that does fit better with Nimrod, and
Mm.
his name is actually included within the name. And the name Nimrod, as you look that back into the Hebrew, is a foreign word. So whatever his name was, this becomes his name or title.
Right.
And this individual lived third generation in around the Eridu area, where Nimrod would have built his tower in Shinar. Sumer is the
Hmm.
transliterated word for Sumer, Shinar. And his name is Enmerakar. And he's quoted in several different languages, and he creates the same ziggurat in the same way, only from a polytheist version of the story, and
Huh.
polytheist gods that are involved, and that the gods are going to destroy this tower and disperse the people and confuse the languages. It's exactly the same
Yep.
story in the same generation after the flood.
Oh, wow.
And Enmerakar, if you take that to the vowelless Sumerian that it was before vowels were introduced. I mean, you have NMR that are right in there, Enmerakar, and
Mm.
those are like three different words in there.
Interesting. Very interesting.
But so I won't go into the minutia of that, but understand that this is either um, a polytheist accounting of that account, or it's a counterfeit of the biblical story.
Right.
I think it's probably a polytheist accounting, because we get the Tower of Babel, and I cover this off in book one. We get multiple of these accounts around the world, even with the Kishimaya. There's a Babel story there. So, I mean, that might happen just with people dispersing,
Right.
but
Telephone
however
game.
it's come down through the polytheist lens. And in the Akkadian version, you really get an eye opener. So, in the story of the Tower of Babel, there's this knowledge that comes to Nimrod from Hermes, from finding this hidden
Right.
antediluvian knowledge.
And this is
Our,
Thoth, right? Thoth in other words, or is that a
well,
totally different character?
Yeah, as you would look at Hermes as part of the Trismegistus, you could look at
Okay.
that as Thoth, him,
Right.
right?
Okay.
Technically, Thoth is sometimes thought of as Enoch, but he's
Right.
part of the Trismegistus too, right? From before the flood, and then
Right.
there's a
Right.
godlike, and then anyways, it won't.
Okay. Okay.
But yes, I do cover those aspects early on in book one, so people understand the Trismegistus, how Hermes fits in that. And there's two different versions of the Trismegistus in polytheism
Mm-hmm.
as well. So I cover that all off. So, but yeah, you're directionally right. But if somebody said, well, no, there was two before the flood,
Right.
one after the flood, not one before and two after. There's two different versions. So, but they all are talking about the same merged being. There's three beings that are merged together there into the Trismegistus. So now when we look at this knowledge that is brought back, this is the knowledge that could have destroyed the world, the knowledge that built the pyramids. High level angelic technology, and this is the knowledge where the Polychronicon and the histories of Freemasonry talk about Nimrod taking this knowledge, initiating 1,000 Masons and building Babel City and Babel Tower. And that in the book of Yasher, if you want to use that account, or the legends of Judaism, and in the Josephus account, they're all talking about Nimrod as he's building this ziggurat, walking up onto it and doing these speeches of as an Antichrist wannabe would do, that if God ever got out of hand again, out of line, and bring something like the flood or some other destruction, he would go into heaven by building this tower
Right.
and kill God,
Hmm.
which is absolutely
Oh
nonsense.
my goodness.
Somebody could think you could build into another dimension or beyond the firmament and by building with bricks, if
Right.
that's what he was referring to. But if we now look at it and say, well, there might be knowledge there, and then we now pull in what is going on in the Akkadian version, and in there it would be, some people say it's Babel, but it's actually Babalu, ILU, which is the same word in Sumerian and Akkadian as AL or EL or IL.
Wow.
So it means an angel or a god. And not confusion of languages as we understand the term coming out from Babel in the Hebrew Bible, from the Hebrew perspective. And Bab is meaning a portal or a gate.
Mm.
So this
Right.
is now a technology that he has the ability to do some sort of stargate or interdimensional travel. So now I start to ask, okay, well, where's he wanting to go? One, he's saying he wants to go into heaven and kill God. Well, you would have to be able to go interdimensionally to do that. But God's not going to permit that because he wants all the names of the book of life to have an opportunity to have their names left in or have it blotted out. So there's a set amount of things that
Right.
have to happen, which is why he interceded for the flood. So he's not going to permit that to happen because that is reserved for Antichrist in the end time.
Yeah. You know
Okay.
what's crazy too about Babel is that even God said this, is that anything that they had their mind set to,
Yeah,
would be
we get the hint
accomplished
of
pretty
that
much.
knowledge. Absolutely. Acting as one people with one language,
Yeah.
anything that they want to do will not be prevented from them doing. Like it's this open door of knowledge.
Wow.
Again, we get the language, we just don't quite get the context because we're not really taught the whole context of what was going on in prehistory. The other place he might want to go as well is into Hades or Sheol, known as
Mm.
the other world and
Right.
1,000 different names in the occult, where Tartarus is located. I
Mm.
use that because we get that in First Peter, where the pit prison is, and also as the place of the prison and the other world in the Greek language as well, and we get the New Testament in Greek. And so Sheol and Hades has the pit prison located within that area, but in a separate location. So who's in the pit prison? Well, all of the fallen angels that did crimes both before the flood and then the offspring gods after the flood, like Baal and Zeus and all of the offspring gods, they're all there with the parent gods. just as 2 Peter talks about, just as Jude talks about, and just as those are the spirits Jesus is visiting in that prison, those spirits, right? For the crimes at the time of the flood. And so when we look at who he might be looking to let out, probably fallen angels. And there's also the terrible ones that are in the sides of the pit prison that are recorded in Ezekiel 32. These are the disembodied spirits of the giants were of the worst kind that aren't permitted to roam the earth. They're in the pit prison as well. So
Wow.
he introduced this polytheist religion. He acted like a giant.
Mm-hmm.
He was emulating everything after the organizational structure of the giants before the flood. So he likely was wanting to get into Hades and Sheol to let those gods and demon spirits out of the pit prison. So all of a sudden now we get a better idea why we have to understand the Tower of Babel.
Right.
And this happens again in the end time, including the Babel religion, including an Antichrist figure, including the access to the pit prison and the destruction of fire.
This is the fall of Babylon, right? Revelation. Or
part of it, yeah.
Part of it, right?
Yeah, because Babylon is destroyed by Antichrist at the midpoint of the llast 7 years. So he replaces that religion with his own. But Babylon is the Babylon system that the occult likes to call it today, that will be replaced with the Leviathan system or the Antichrist system, the beast system, in the last 3.5 years. Similar system, probably just taken to a slightly different level. So the Babylon system will look very, very similar to the Antichrist system.
Interesting. Now, you see all these secret societies. I mean, the ones that are obvious to people, I mean, like myself or whatever, but you got the Rosicrucians, you got the Knights of the Knights Templar, you've got the Freemasons, you've got, the Committee of 300, so on and so forth. You've got like this pyramid scheme of power. Let's talk about like where that is today.
So I would look at the model a little differently, and I explain the model in book 2 for people, is that pyramid can't grab all the organizations. There's just too many of them.
Or like
you
a web
can
chart.
use that. Yeah, the flow chart just doesn't work. Now you have multiple ones. Now where do you put all these multiple pyramids? So to better understand the system and to show you how organized it is, they use a term called the Thelemic tree.
Oh, yeah.
And the Thelemic tree is a Greek word, thelem, which means and is used in the New Testament as God's will. And so theirs would be plural. They're, the way of their God's will, right?
Didn't Aleister Crowley didn't he have a religion that he established?
Yep.
Thelma.
It's all that, and it gives much of the information, and that includes doing anything you want to do, and that's where the sexual aspect comes in that sort of understanding.
Right.
So that word is mistranslated a couple of times as sexual type of orgies in the New Testament, and it should be God's will, and it fits the narrative better as well. So just another interesting way of how some of the translations kind of show up. And I'm not saying Bibles are damaged. They all have issues in their translations because they're missing the context of the consistency, which is the real issue for the most part. So the Thelemic tree is like a big cedar tree. A Thelemic tree is also a ash, oak, or an elm tree from a genealogical perspective. So they have 2 Thelemic trees for the organizational structure versus the genealogical branches of the spurious. You have this cedar that would be, I think, based on the cedar of Lebanon and the cedars of Mount Hermon, because that's where their oath-based society starts. Right? And the description that the Amorites are described as, they're as strong as oaks and as tall as cedars. Right?
Right. Yeah. That's crazy.
Now, Now, what's interesting is the cedar tree has these branches that come down as opposed to out and up in like a lot of other trees. So this giant tree is the visible organizational structure of the earth, and the Thelemic trunk has trunk organizations. So at the bottom of the trunk is, and I'll start there because we talked about Freemasonry as the lowest level of the trunk organizations earlier. That's first level of adept at 3 degree on the old York system and 33rd degree on the Scottish Rite system. So Illuminati is the next trunk order, and that starts at about the 5th degree. And the Rosicrucians are above that, and that's going to go up to at least 7 on the old system. And that's an intersection of the pure blood families with the lesser blood families, that because you all have to be invited into these organizations, and the pure or the ennobled aspect of your bloodline is where you fit in their hierarchy. So they're trying to always introduce more people at the lower end and bring them up, but they're probably never going to go above the bottom half of the Rosicrucians. So, but keep in mind, the bloodlines now populate the top half of the Rosicrucians and up. So above the Rosicrucians is the Committee of 300 families. Above that is the 33 families. And above that is the 13 families. And so when we look at the Illuminati, that's a branch, that's a trunk organization that has the skull of bones that we talked about in it, that moves into that trunk organization at that level as being part of the Illuminati extension. And then in that branch, as it comes down and you have other branches, you have your complete hierarchy of that branch along however that branch is going to be. So now you start to get an understanding of where this sort of fits. So you would have like the Committee of 300 would be responsible for all banking in the world, anything monetary, anything trade. So you would have like the Davos branch intersecting in there. You would have the World Bank and their organizations. You would have
Bank of International
World Trade,
Settlements.
organizations. All of those are operated in at that level. And so the Jesuits aren't, and you notice they didn't have a trunk organization. They would intersect in, depending on where you wanted to put them, either at the Committee of 300 or the 33 families. And the reason why I say that is I think initially they would have been sponsored in from the 33, because there's a term in Italy that's called the black nobility. It's also used for the other European families, but more famously for the black nobility. And that black nobility goes back to on several different genses, like the Claudius gens or the Fabia gens or the Julia gens, to name a few. They go back through the Caesars, back to the 100 senator families, back to Romulus and Remus, who were the offspring of the god Ares. And Mars in the Latin ones. So another gens to give you an insight would be the Creta gens, which is the Herculidean kings, or Herculides, the Gyges kings of Assyria, Asia Minor, and parts of Greece. And Hercules is the sponsor of that one bloodline. He has several bloodlines that he sponsors, but he's the offspring of Zeus and Alcmene. And that's the Creta gens, coming from the word for Crete in several different languages, KRT in the original Semitic or Hebrew. So that's the Creta gens. There's an Elbe gens that's more the northerly ones. There are genses of these ones that go back to not only specific giants, but a specific celestial mafia godfather. Right? And again, all of these roots, whether it's the genealogical tree, Thelemic tree, or the cedar tree for the organization, their roots go into Hades or Sheol, where their gods are. That's their heaven. So they receive their power and their genealogical roots from them. Everything's nicely sort of made into these imageries, right? Because they're very good at doing those types of things. So getting back now to how that connects into the Jesuits, they were originally sponsored by the 33, the invisible ones, and they needed to get the new Templars into the Catholic Church. They tried in 1317, but failed. And they poisoned the Pope and then sort of went back sort of underground and hid because but they were always trying to get them back in, and the 33 were called the invisible ones. So, and probably why they had to stay undercover was after the attack on the Vatican by poisoning the Pope at that time. So, when they sponsor through Ignatius of Loyola, as the founder of the Jesuits, he's going to run into a fellow by the name of Francis Borgia, who's going to bail him out of jail in the Inquisition in 1529. Francis Borgia is part of the Pope bloodlines of Borgias, and his grandfather was a pope, and he's a royale in the court's king, and he's the grand master of the Montesa order, which was the order formed by the King of Spain to take the Templar assets after the fall of the Knights Templar in Spain. The same thing happened in Portugal as well. So he's sponsoring now Ignatius of Loyola, and through his papal genealogies and popes, he's going to get them sponsored through papal bulls into this organization that's going to be the New Templars in the Roman Church. And in 1550, Francis Borgia is going to resign as the Grand Master. His son's going to take over, and then he's going to join the Jesuits. And by 1565, he becomes the third leader. And working with the King of France, or the King of Spain, they're doing wars with the Savoy Kingdom and with the Vatican, and they bankrupt the Vatican and win the war. And so now Francis Borgia, as the leader of the Jesuits, through the King of Spain, is given the banking that he then moves to Switzerland to join up with the Templar assets that were given to the Knights Templar to start the banking that happened there before, after the fall of the Knights Templar. Now, what's important to understand about this banking is before the 1500s, 1572, I think is when, if my memory serves me right, when that happens, the banking had been taken over by another black nobility called the junior black nobility, who were migrating families from Tyre in the Middle East that settled in Florence and Venice, like the Medicis, for example. And they were doing all of the banking, but now they got that back in because the Templars were the first major modern banks in the West. So they wanted the banking control back as well. So that's part of everything that's going on there. Now, it's the junior black nobility that will take front and center with the reestablishment of the Jesuits, because in the early 1800s, they're disbanded because they're overthrowing kings. They've gone rogue. And the royals are not going to put up with this. So they ensure that the Jesuits are disbanded. But then they start to do crazy things like imprison the popes in France for several popes. And one of those popes, while he's in prison, he says, I'm going to bring the Jesuits back because I need protection from the royals, right? And so then they get recreated at the same time as you start getting the Mary apparitions, and everything sort of starts to work together in the Jesuit favor. And remember, Ignatius was initiated by Mary apparitions to go on his mission. Several different apparitions. So it's the black nobility that are sponsoring the Jesuits and their prominence to come back to power. So you have the original creation that was by the senior black nobility that goes back to Romulus and Remus bloodlines. And then you have this junior black nobility from the Middle East. So I know they intersect. I just don't know which one they intersect into this day. But
very interesting. What a rabbit hole.
I know.
It's just, there's just so much information out there. And once you start seeing the patterns, you can start to put it together and start to get backup sourcing on it.
Right. What's the most common practice you think, like with these families? They marry into each other? Is this kind of like, or these societies? Is this kind of like the preferred thing?
It's the preferred thing because you need to have those genes,
the blue bloods,
and genealogy, right?
Genealogy, right.
And so, like the American bloodlines that everybody talks about is these many of them as part of the 13 families, not a chance. Pseudo blue
Really?
bloods. And that's not a nice term.
You talking about like the European American, like the Rockefellers and the
Yeah. So the Rockefellers, Warburgs, Carnegies, Morgans, DuPonts, go through the whole list of the pseudo blue bloods. They
industrialists?
they were funded by the Rothschilds.
Right.
So they're their stable agents, as they like to call them. And in return, they would have some low-line blood level, but in return for doing the agenda of the bloodlines, they would be permitted to have their offspring intermarry into more pure bloodlines and have a higher position down the road. And so this also works in the same way as with the Bohemian, not the Bohemian Grove, the Bilderberger organization. You have a pure blood, and then you have all these pseudo blue bloods that are sent a letter to go to this meeting, summoned to a meeting once a year to get their marching orders. So you'd have Clinton, Bill Gates, all the new, they are what they're doing. They have their agenda fulfilled, and in return, they can have their offspring intermarry into the bloodlines as well to become better off down the road. So the old families are still there. So you want to boil down to the 13, it's really hard to get to, but even the Rothschilds aren't part of the 13. And the Rothschilds would fit into the Committee of 300 as well, with their own sort of branch, particularly with banking and how they work with the banking aspect of it. Their name was changed from the Bauer family to the Rothschilds when they set up the London Bank. And they're a Jewish part. And the Jewish part are part of the secret societies and royales, but not a large part in terms of dominating it. They have a big role, but they're not the most important piece.
Who do you think is like top dog of everything with that? Like, if you had one name for that?
Well, when you have 13 main families, you have 13 rivals. Let me put it to you that way.
Interesting. Right.
Yeah, and 13 just in the West. So if you look at what happened in World War I, that was a civil war of a family. They're all cousins.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's crazy. So they're all fighting for power.
And first cousins.
Of course. Yeah.
And now you factor in that at the end, towards the end of World War I, that something that was created by the Western bloodlines called social masonry, which we would know as anarchism, progressivism, communism, socialism, all the various branches of social masonry. This was launched on a rival bloodline that would not cooperate, and who they deemed, what I'm saying is the Western bloodline deemed as more pure. And that was the Romanov bloodline. Was basically wiped out with the creation of the Western bloodlines through communism. And that's a junior offshoot of the pure bloodline, which is the Putyanin bloodline of Kiev, of the original czars, of the Scythians, Indo-Aryan giants. Yes, and it was kept very pure and separate from a lot of the Western ones. And so they took them out. Well, that social masonry shows up in National Socialism, and the complete disappearance, let's say, or exiling of the Kaiser royal bloodline and the German royal bloodline. And then social masonry was set in motion in China. It took down the Shah dynasties from the dragon creator gods, from before the flood and after the flood. The sons of heaven were the original giant kings, and they took that down as a rival. And so we now actually have Xi, who's back in power, who's from the Western bloodline of the Shah dynasties. XIA is the spelling for Shah, just as XI is for Xi, and that's the Western of the Shah. So you have a royale back on the throne there who has basically said he's back forever, and I would expect to see some sort of dynastic takeover. And the Shah dynasty also sponsored most of the kingships in Southeast Asia, including the Yamato bloodline in Japan. So when I talk about bloodlines all around the world, there's rivals. So when we get down to who from a Western family that is likely to sponsor an Antichrist type figure because they want to bring about the Antichrist, their own dragon Messiah. You get down to a number of them, and we have to be careful because there's going to be multiple Antichrists. And Jesus warns us about this, and the epistles of John reinforces it. So we don't want to be picking anyone that comes along. But one of them will rise to the top. Absolutely. I think if you're looking at families that I would say who would have, at least today, an inside track, you would look at the Windsor family, which is the Hanover bloodline out of Germany.
Right, which is the Britain.
Yeah, which is Britain. Yeah, but not with Charles. He's too old.
Okay.
Maybe with William.
Okay.
And they have a lot of ennobleness in their bloodlines. But the one that currently holds the King of Jerusalem title, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, it's a title that the Knights Templar had set up through the sponsorship of the Council of the Barons, which is the senior order to the junior order of Knights Templar. That was set up, and that is the Priory of Sion, which is the senior royals, and they nominated all of the kings of Jerusalem. That separated after the junior order was officially separated in 1118 with Hugh de Payan, also a royal, and an Anjou from Lorraine region of France, as well as de Bouillon is an Anjou. And the folk of Anjou, who is an unnamed, along with a St. Clair, as two of the additional onto the 9 that we get coming down through history. He's going to become Anjou, the third king of Jerusalem in 1118. De Bouillon only lives a year. His brother is put on the throne, and when he dies, Anjou, the folk of Anjou, is the cousin of de Bouillon, same family, and he's going to become the first king of Jerusalem in the title. And so the Anjou have grafted into their bloodlines, and particularly the Lorraine Anjou, the genealogy ancestry through a person called Dagobert, who was the last survivor of the Merovingians, who took their bloodlines back to giants, obviously, as part of the royal bloodline, but also they scioned in Benjamite bloodlines through the Sicambian Franks, and also Davidic bloodlines of some of the Despacini and others that moved, and Davidic bloodlines as they moved into Europe. And they also allegedly put in, falsely, Jesus and Mary Magdalene's descendants in there as well through Aragon and Amenemhat. Aragon comes from the Camelot dynasties through Joseph of Arimathea, who they say took Josephus, their son, to the Camelot dynasties and intermarried into the Camelot dynasties. That's their belief system, not mine. I think it's false, but they believe it's true. But what's interesting, though, is it's the Benjamite bloodlines that is important when we consider Jerusalem, because in the time of the Exodus, exactly in the time of the conquest of the covenant land by Joshua, Joshua awards Jerusalem to the Benjamites.
Right.
So as a dragon Messiah wannabe, they want that King of Jerusalem title. So that's been passed down through history. And today, King Bourbon of Spain holds the King of Jerusalem title.
Okay. How do you king? What's his name?
Philippe. Philipe, and Bourbon, Bourbon. And his father, Juan Carlos, had it before, and he inherited it through the Habsburg Lorraine dynasty through intermarriage. And the Habsburgs of Austria inherited it through intermarriage with those bloodlines of the Lorraine region in France. Today, though, they have two other rivals. So von Habsburg today still makes himself as the claim, even though inside the family they say it's passed on. And then the Savoy Anjou, the nobility of Italy, makes a claim there as well.
Gotcha.
So, and then you have survivors of a bloodline of the Stuarts, which were the most ennobled bloodline since the time of the Merovingians, that still could play in as an antichrist. And then you have all sorts of other families that would be in amongst the St. Clairs as well, would be another one. In fact, in Geezer Castle, where the St. Clairs ruled from, they changed their name from Rollo after the treaty that they made with France after taking Normandy. And Geezer Castle was in control of the de Guisers through an intermarriage with the St. Clairs. So, like Marie de St. Clair is the second Grand Master after de Guiser after 1188, after the splitting away of the Senior Order from the Junior Order of the Templars at the splitting of the Elm for losing Jerusalem, because that fell in 1187. And they become the first Grand Masters after that. Whereas people say, well, it doesn't go back to the time of the Templars because there's no Grand Masters. They were all the same Grand Masters based on the Senior Order Grand Mastership before that. So you just have to put those two together. So it's the Templar Grand Masters that were before. So in the Gnostic bloodline, in the Elven bloodline, in the European bloodlines, the strongest tradition for the introduction, not from a biblical introduction, but from a polytheist introduction, is walking through the Grand Arch in the main street of Geezers for the person that they call the Grand Monarch, which would be the false Messiah.
Right.
Right.
Now that Grand Arch has connections to Baal, correct?
Oh, for sure. Absolutely.
Yeah, they have one in
The-
New York too.
Right,
A modern day
right.
one in New York they have. I visited it too, and
Yeah,
they,
so
Mhm.
yeah, let me just sort of come back to that. The St. Clairs are the Sinclairs. That's the transliterated name, as some of the St. Clairs moved over to Scotland, who were the founders of Freemasonry, and they took in escaping Templars to start that organization again in 1317. And then the Rosicrucians, for the adepts of the Templars, were started as the first visible aspect of that Rosy Cross order as the senior order of the Priory of Sion that split in 1188. So, and they become known as the Rosicrucians after that.
So all these names that
Yeah.
you're going off right now, these are all royal bloodlines, which all stem from Nephilim and giant bloodlines.
Yeah, they all want to be the one
Right.
who's going to start the world dynasty. And there can only be one, like the Highlander movies and TV series.
There can only be one.
Right?
Right.
There can only be
Exactly.
one. And they are rivals. And they will continue to have wars because they have that war gene.
Right.
So, yes.
It's fascinating because you watch movies like our whole lives, I always thought the Knights Templar were Jesus loving knights, and from what you're saying, it's really the complete opposite. Their bloodline is of the devil. It's the Nephilim giant bloodline.
Yeah, of the adepts, of the Grand Masters that ruled the Templars. Below that would be just like Freemasonry, right? So same organization that was set up throughout.
Yeah, Knights of the
So
Round
now
Table.
when we talk about Baal on that arch, I mean,
yeah.
I mean, you can associate an arch with a lot of civilizations, but and particularly Rome, right? Because they really used it, but it's just the same beast religion, right? It's just a different daughter of Babylon.
It's just
So
repackaged, repainted.
Yeah. And Baal is the same, as Zeus, is the same as Osiris, is the same. Yeah, they're all the same gods, the same pantheon, just different vernacular names, and they are all post-Diluvian gods and offspring gods that I just named there. So Baal is the son of El. El is the god that lived before the flood and ruled. Baal rules afterwards. And so this arch is sort of emblematic of the dome as well, right? That whole dome sort of
obelisk and dome kind of architecture.
Now, the reason why they honor Baal that way is because of the Baalim Council. And so the Baalim Council is a terrific reference for us from the Bible, because that's the main pantheon of gods that we're getting. And Baalim is plural for Baal, the Baalim ones, his ruling council. And this is the council of the gods that is talked about in Psalms 82.
Right.
And there's a council of the gods that El ruled over, and when he was taken to the pit prison, Baal moves up. This council of the gods is the same council of the gods that's in all the other polytheist cultures, usually at a mountain. And so Mount Hermon in the Ugaritic texts is where this council of the gods is located, of the Baalim. And Baal and Anat, his queen of heaven, versus Ashtaroth and El before the flood. So if you want to understand prehistory from a before and after the flood, look at the god being named. So, for example, in Sumeria, you have Anu as the parent god, Anki and Enlil are offspring gods ruling after the flood. Kronos is before the flood, Zeus is after the flood, Ra is before the flood, Osiris is after the flood, as the main chief god, male god. So, this council of the gods is located at Mount Saphon in the Ugaritic text. We also get Mount Hermon called Sion, S-I-O-N, Sirion, and Shanir. So it has many different names. And the name is actually changed to Hermon from the oath that we would know down through the book of Enoch as the oath of Haram Anathema. This ecclesiastical oath and ostracization, and to carry it out through the end. So Haram is the Hebrew word haram, Cherem, Cheram, and a couple other variants, all meaning curse and accursed. That's where the oath of the 200 was taken. And so the Mount Hermon's name is changed to that to reflect what happened there. Again, if we just were to learn a little bit more, or taught a little bit more from people that should be teaching us this, things would make a little bit more sense. And so Baal and the Baalim, they create giants after the flood. And that's why they end up going to the pit prison as well, and why they're said as being killed, just as the parent gods are being, are overthrown by the offspring gods. And they said that they killed them, except that they're immortal beings. You can't kill an immortal being unless you're God, and I don't even know how he would do that. But he certainly is going to put them in the lake of fire to burn forever at the end. And so they're not dead. They're just like dead because they were taken away. And so in the Ugaritic texts, the Baalim create Rephaim giants, which is why we get Rapha and Rephaim giants before the flood, Nephilim giants, Rephaim giants after the flood, Nephilim giants before the flood.
Right.
So it starts to make some sense. And so this council of gods, both before and after the flood, would award all of the kingships from that council. And they would come to the assembly of the Detanu. That is the assembly of the giants in the Ugaritic text. And so they're awarded that. They're also awarded that at Nippur in the Sumerian. It's the same location. Nippur is Mount Hermon. Again, you have the council of the hierarchy of gods in Greek mythology. And hierarchy means, sacred assembly of archons, angels, right?
Right. It's crazy.
So, it's crazy, right?
It's crazy.
All
it's
the
crazy, man.
same story that's told all around the world. So they would swear an oath to a specific god when they were given that power. And that oath is reflected in what we saw King Charles do. He's not swearing to the God of the Bible, but probably to a genealogical celestial mafia godfather.
I agree.
Right? And that's who provides them the divine right to rule. So bringing that full circle, then it starts to make sense why that grand arch, as it's associated with Baal, would be the place where the grand monarch would make his entrance through.
Right. Wow. It's crazy too, because it's so funny. Prince Charles has said many things on the mic, where you're like, wait, what did he just say? If you have the discernment to kind of like understand, where he's coming from. But even, George Bush Jr., he even said it in a speech. He's, where he referenced an angel in the whirlwind. Don't you think, there's an angel out there directing the storm pretty
The
much?
storm god, Baal, yes.
Yeah, it's wild, man. It's
Interesting.
wild. It's wild.
Yeah, or the 1,000 points of light that he used at least twice, and his father used at least twice,
Right.
and Junior used at the funeral of his father. That is in conjunction with their rhetoric on a new world order. For world government, that I would say is a Nephilim world order, but that's my.
Right.
But it's the allegory that they're using there. That spark is the spark of the divine, is 1,000 points of light. The spark of the divine is the spark that all of that genealogy from the fallen angels have, that they need to unite to be able to evolve into godhood. So they have to bring about the old religion. They have to bring about a world civilization so that they can reach godhood. So they are not super high up. Illuminati would be the highest I would place them, and that's would fit for both of the Bushes, but they are still higher than
right.
Freemason adepts. So
what's crazy too is I heard in Freemasonry, to get to the highest achievement of godhood, one has to cross dress in order to attain the male and the female or something. Is that true, or is it just a bunch of malarkey?
it's likely true, but maybe in a more sophisticated manner on that. So they take their belief system back to this understanding that, as we do, that the gods are a spirit being, but they can take a physical form. And biblically, we know they can take a physical form, even though Christians are told over and over and over. And how do we know that? Well, the Bible tells us this. So, like in Hebrews 13, so just so that people don't say he's making it up.
Right.
If be nice to strangers, lest you run across an angel unaware, and you won't even know it. So they can be here in physical form, acting physically, and we may not know them. And in the Sodom and Gomorrah narrative, Jehovah becomes in physical form as well as two angels.
Right.
And at first, Abraham doesn't recognize that the angels are angels, that they're men, and he's calling them men. And they're eating, drinking, touching, interacting. And then the two angels go over to Sodom, and now they're recognized as judges or angels, and they're there to judge the city, and that they want to have sex with them, right? Now, whichever sex that they're wanting to have, it gets a little bit confusing when you understand that they can take a physical form, and they can take a form of their choice.
Right.
In terms of gender, and maybe other forms as they're talked about as shapeshifters as well in the occult. So now that makes sense when you have a Nat, which is a female god, right? Which would be Hebrew Eloah, AH with the female format versus I am as a female. Could also be used for the action of a god too. So you have to understand the context that the Hebrew is in there. And Elohim is the male plural for that as well. So, and we actually get Eloah that's used in the Old Testament. So whether or not that's being used for its application of power or referring to a female, I'll leave that up to other people. It's too big of a rabbit hole to go into each one of them. But understand, biblically, we're told there are female physical angels, not necessarily angelic, right?
Right.
And so, and we get the names of some of those in the Bible, so we know there's goddess.
Well, what's your take on Lilith and all that
goddesses in the
stuff?
pantheon.
Is that kind of based off that, or?
Well, Lilith in the Sumerian pantheon is either an angel or a demigod. And it could be both, because they produced as well, just as we talked about Nin producing Gilgamesh. Right, and that was a goddess. So
it's like a mother goddess of the whole Nephilim thing.
Yeah, and so I think that it's probably, I used to think it was just a demigod, but I found too many passages where there's an angel that's related there as well. So I think definitely Lilith enters into the biblical narrative illegitimately through the time that Judah is in exile in Babylon, because we don't have any records of Lilith and all of those stories before that. And
Right.
it's a
Gotcha.
Sumerian story, right? So I think it's been overlaid through Kabbalism and the eastern part of Judaic mysticism. So I think that's how it sort of comes in. So if we understand that they could produce giants through females, are they asking these angels to change form into a female to have sex to produce more giants? Because according to the Gnostics, Sodom is the location of giant creation after the flood. And Gomorrah
Interesting.
was the location before the flood. And all of this whole story of this strange flesh that Jude is talking about in this story, and as Peter talks about in this filthy language, and these are the same crimes that were going on before the flood, leads you to two possible explanations as to what was being talked about. Or did they want them to have sex with human females to produce more giants? I mean, with their daughters. I mean, hard to really know. So I like to be sort of open-minded on that because of these other passages we get coming out of the New Testament. So we know they can take a physical form and a gender, but they would be able to take a male form anytime they wanted to as well. But typically when they're wanting to be consistent in a physical form, you wouldn't want to confuse your followers, right? So you'd probably be pretty consistent with that. So now getting back to what they're doing, my understanding of it, it's one of two things, is that when they become godlike in the physical world versus the spiritual world, they're going to reflect both, and their bodies will be dual nature. And the more deeper thought process on that body that they would receive, because if they succeed, the world's going to be destroyed, right? And they're going to need new bodies. So it's the phoenix coming out of the fire, out of the ashes. Right?
Order out of chaos.
Order out of chaos. It's Shiva destroying the world and recreating the world.
And they believe that
afterward.
to be like an alchemical process.
Yes, they do. And that you can take the spirit and just put it into sleeves, as that one TV show talked about, right? Because the Oiketarian is the soul and the body in the physical world, where the spirit merges with the soul. And that's
what do you call that? What would you call that?
Oiketarian.
Oiketarian.
Yeah. Jude 1:6, habitation, goes back to the Greek word oiketarian, means dwelling place for the spirit. One other place it's used, different variations are used in the New Testament, but in 2 Corinthians 5:2, it says the house in heaven that we groan for, even though we have a house on earth. That house in heaven, that's oiketarian again. So we dwell for our dwelling place in heaven, just like those angels left their dwelling place in heaven. Oiketarian in heaven, oiketarian on the earth, soul on the body that the spirit merges with, right? Because when we die, our spirits go back to heaven, according to Ecclesiastics, and goes in a sleep state. But the disembodied spirits of the giants, their spirits aren't allowed to go to heaven, aren't allowed to sleep. They're either going to the pit prison or they're wandering the earth.
Wow. Incredible.
Yikes.
So, so I think that meaning, to get back to the final point on it, is from a larger God perspective, they would look at an angel having the capability of being both and holding that within a spirit nature. And that's the level of the spirit that they want evolved to have.
Wow. Reminds me of like shapeshifters and like the Navajo culture, where they have to perform certain blood like rituals, like killing their offspring or mother, or to change to create that godlike state where they can shapeshift into whatever they want.
Yep.
What a trip.
It is a trip, man. It is a trip. So, Gary, we got about 12 minutes left, brother, till we hit our 2 hour mark. And so I wanted to kind of end on this topic here. So we're obviously moving deeper and deeper into the hour of disclosure with, some sort of more UFO stuff or alien stuff.
Yeah.
Just what are your kind of conclusions with everything going on in our reality today?
They've been doing a lot of preparation for us.
Hmm.
And what's interesting as it starts to speed up, it seemed to be in preparation for 2025. I don't think we get all of it all at once, but 2025 is the age of Lord Maitreya starting to come back. And that comes from Indo-Aryan Mitra from Mithraism.
Oh, okay.
And is the same god as Shiva.
Mhm.
So the destroyer god. And so
Would you call it age of what?
Lord Maitreya,
Okay.
Maitreya.
And CERN's involved with Shiva too, I noticed. So.
Yes. Yeah, it's all
Right.
kind of interconnected.
I even think
So,
the Bible references, was it Abaddon, right? Abaddon,
Abaddon,
being destruction.
Apollyon, yeah,
Apollyon,
Azazel, scapegoat,
Wow.
goat god.
All right, another hour, people. Let's go.
Yeah. So, what was the question again?
So with the disclosure events that
Right.
seem
So
to kind of be
2025 is what Alice Bailey wrote in a number of books as being the year of the
Mhm.
externalization of the hierarchy.
Wow.
Here we go.
As
What
this
a
age
process.
as well. Yes.
Strap in.
So what the heck does that mean? That means that we're going to see the invisible hierarchy made physical, visible.
Wow. Ascending masters.
In this age that's
right.
just starting, the celestial masters. So that's the council of the gods. And it has to be that way in the end time, because it's got to be like the days of Noah, when the watchers and the angels walked amongst us, when the giants
physical.
walked among us,
Right.
both before and after the flood.
So you're saying the possibility of these UFOs maybe actually being these beings, this hierarchy of the lords coming back.
No, it's the angels. The fallen angels.
That's
are
what I
coming
mean.
back.
That's what I mean. Sorry.
There's a visible hierarchy and there's an invisible hierarchy. And the invisible hierarchy can make themselves physically visible, but they're two separate hierarchies. There's the spurious offspring, which is the lower hierarchy that we would understand as a visible hierarchy today. So the royals, the bloodlines,
right?
They would be from a Nephilim, Rephaim perspective at the top of the hierarchy.
Right.
But you have at the bottom of the hierarchy, and who knows what's in between here.
Yeah.
But what I can speak to is what we know biblically. We know about Nephilim, we know about Rephaim, we know about the disembodied spirits as demons, right? And they're going to need bodies. So all the disembodied ones are going to need some sort of Oikotarian in the end time to walk amongst us. So they're creating clones and other things as dwelling spirits for them. But there's another classification in polytheism that they call elementals. And there's 4 different groups in the elementals. And the elementals are in all cultures around the world, just as pyramids are, just as the flood is, just as giant. It's part of the same legacy and history, and the same 4 groups that are akin to and named after physical elements of the world, which is where the word comes from. So wind, fire, air, things like that, right? Earth. And one is the largest one and is higher than the lower 3. One is called salamanders, and they are reptilian beings that live basically in the earth and in tunnels and other dimensions.
In hollow earth.
In hollow earth, yeah. And then you have the little ones that are broken up into 3 different groups. One are good-looking ones, one are mischievous ones like leprechauns, and one is ugly ones like gnomes and trolls and hobbits,
duendes,
things like that.
Yeah, duendes. I keep saying this stuff is real. Like everything that we've been taught is mythological is actually real.
Yep.
Like, yeah.
So what's interesting is the gnomes as we look at the crossover into the alien mythos, and also understand Anunnaki are used in the alien mythos and are also
Right.
another name for giants and for their parents, right? For the
Right.
gods. So, and watchers are used interchangeably in all the cultures around the world for both the angels and for the giants that they created. So the gnomes were in charge of all of the knowledge and all of the technology and all of the genealogies of the hierarchy, of the visible hierarchy, and subservient to the giants. And they also are described in the fairy mythos as having flying machines. And they come through
the flaming chariots.
they come through fairy domens for the most part. Domen is the word portal.
This is what I was waiting for. That's why I
Kind of like
brought up
Lord
the
of the
UFOs.
Rings. I think they say
Okay.
the
Yeah.
same thing in Lord of the Rings. Like when they're
Yep.
speaking to go into the portal, they say they're kind of the same thing.
Yep,
That's
they
crazy.
do. Yep.
Wow.
And when they come through, they kidnap people and they do sexual experimentation on them.
Oh man.
And they have this issue of extending and renewing their DNA. So because they're having issues with that. And then they return people and they don't have a memory of it unless you get it out through. So these are stories told throughout the world, all throughout our history. I put two of them in. One's a couple hundred years old, one's 400 years old. It's identical to a gray alien abduction. Now, what's even more bizarre, and it's coincidence, which it isn't, is that these gnomes are called grays.
Really?
Right.
Fascinating.
Now,
That
Dang.
is crazy.
how do we get back there biblically? Well, we're told in the book of Galatians about these elementals that enslave us in this world.
Mm-hmm.
And then in Colossians, you have a similar accounting of what enslaves us in this world, but the word is rudiments. So both of those words, they go back to the Greek word stoichion. And it can mean like the basic element of a world, so, and when it's used that way, it's emphatic that it's a basic element of the world, a principal element, not a living being.
Mm-hmm.
But an inanimate object can't enslave us. So in these passages, this is for a being that's enslaving us, that's part of the hierarchy. And in both passages, they are being used in reference to fallen angels, right? As being part of the conversation here. And so that word rudiment goes back to stoichion as well. So these are the elementals. And
Wow.
they are talked about extensively in the occult as being the lowest level of the visible hierarchy.
Wow.
So we see a crossover of reptilian, gnomes, other types of creatures that could have been created that were part of the spurious offspring. So when we hear of things spoken of in polytheism, of creatures created by the gods, we need to understand those as similar spurious offspring to the giants,
Right.
and part of that visible hierarchy that enslaves us in this world.
Right. And aren't the grays like kind of like the foot soldiers of the invisible, like kind of gods or whatever, to do their dirty work?
They are. Yep.
Okay.
And foot soldiers would be pretty good word for it. There's a word, I think it's in Ezekiel 26, and it's called the Gamadim. Notice the I am male plural that's used for Nephilim, Rephaim, Avim, Seraphim, Cherubim. It's got to do with the genealogical basis back to fallen angels. And so in Hebrew, it's described as a plural, but as in one. So you would have Gibborim as the mighty ones, as we see it translated.
Right.
As Nephilim as the giant ones. Depending on which definition of Rephaim you're using, you could use giant ones, or you could put the demon ones or the spirit ones, all interconnected. Seraphim would be the serpent ones or the dragon ones, as the angels, right? So when we look at that word Gamadim, it has that interesting plural, and in the ancient society and languages, the I am plural reflected the royal, majestic bloodline with that suffix on it. So Horim is another example in the Bible. And so that suggests a spurious offspring. So, and they're in the towers in the time of Nebuchadnezzar, in the towers defending Tyr from Nebuchadnezzar. And I'm thinking, I have no other frame of reference for these people, so I look up the word in the Hebrew, and it's gamad, and gamadim is the plural, and it means a cubit. So 18 to 21 inches, depending on how you want to define that for the height. These were little foot soldier beings.
Yeah, it's
fighting
wild, man.
Nebuchadnezzar.
That's wild. I mean,
Wow.
the giant stuff is so, restrained from public. You got to dive into it. You got to see, what archaeological findings have been done and teams that are out there, and they've written about this stuff. It's fascinating. You got the Smithsonian kind of
trying to cover it up,
moving things around in their way.
Yep.
It's also crazy. Gary, you really made so many connections for us tonight, and really we only kind of still scratched the surface with it all. And there's still so much more to talk about. I really can't wait to get you on in the future, and we can talk more about like Atlantis, and because there's so many more other avenues that branch off of the bloodline topic.
Yeah, absolutely. We just skim the surface of so many things, and I was thinking as I was talking about the little ones, we should probably think of the alien phenomena in interdimensional terms versus interplanetary, and that's part of the deception, because every reference we have out of prehistory is interdimensional, not interplanetary.
Right. They're making it interplanetary now.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. To make it that we're part of this galactic universe.
Yes.
Sitting part of this rebellious table fighting the Dark Lord of the universe.
Right. And I mean, we've said it a few times on the show that we think, the Antichrist figure is going to look like some sort of alien god figure in some way, shape, or form. I don't know what your thoughts are with that, but I mean, it seems like. And then there's going to be this apotheosis ritual that takes place somewhere in between all that, right? Because you've got that talked about, in Revelation.
I mean, even the Pope said he would baptize aliens. So I mean,
you've got this vibe of evangelism from these beings that are going that we seem to be anticipating more each and every day.
I don't know what to expect for the look of the Antichrist.
Maybe like transhumanism, cyborg, alien-looking character.
Yeah.
I think it's way more sophisticated than just a man. But then I could be wrong. But I still,
Well, one of the interesting terms is son of perdition.
Right.
Yes. Yep.
And that's very much associated with Apollyon, as you take that Greek word back to the series of words it comes out of. And the only other term that we get for son of perdition is with Judas. And that's when Satan enters into Judas to give him the courage to betray Jesus.
Right.
And so it may have a relationship to that, or it may have a relationship to a genealogical sense as a son of the destroyer. So son of Shiva, son of Azazel, son of Abaddon, son of Apollyon. You could look at it that way as well. And that we do know Antichrist is the one who comes up out of the abyss in Revelation 17 and called the one who once was, now is not, and will be again.
Yes.
But we also know he's human because he receives a mortal head wound.
Right.
So there's something more going on there. And the one who comes up out of the abyss is also the one that kills the two witnesses just before Antichrist takes over. So Is that before it becomes part of Antichrist, or during, or is that the same reference to Antichrist? It's really hard to know with that passage, but there is
Right.
this intersection. So he could be the avatara
Mm.
of the
Right.
destroyer god and of Satan, or one or the other, just as Vishnu was the avatar of the Avatara Buddha,
Right.
and did like 19 other avatar relationships with beings. And that's what they call an incarnation,
Right.
which is why I try and get Christians to be careful using polytheist terms of an incarnation that they say Jesus did, which is completely different
Right.
than what
Don't get it
Well,
twisted with paganism.
speaking of
Antichrist will
incarnation,
do.
I just find
Yeah.
it fascinating the upbringing of AI, this all-knowing platform, and you got, I say this almost every episode now, you got Elon Musk going on Joe Rogan going, hey, our AI platform is smarter than the smartest person on the planet, but by 2029 or 2030, we're going to have an AI that's smarter than everybody on the planet combined. And I
Yes.
think, if you could take that and put it into somebody's body, that incarnation that
Yeah.
way seems possible now.
The
It really
hive
does,
mind.
definitely.
Yeah. It's like
Yeah, the
demonic
hive mind.
technology.
Well, yeah, that's what they're going to want to create. And
For
in
sure.
conjunction with that is that the Antichrist is not just an incarnation, but it's the Christ consciousness,
Yes.
right? So that's, again, goes directly to the avatara effect. And what's interesting about the hive mind, we'll finish up on this then, is that that's a trait that the bloodlines believe they used to have, that they all could communicate.
Right.
And that it allowed them to
One
do
language.
things that you couldn't do acting as non-telepathic beings, right? You could get into this hive being, and the hive mind has the queen bee as part of the allegory, kind of like the Borg, and it's like Sophia of Gnosticism, the mother goddess that creates the 12 archons that they put God of the Bible amongst. And so when you think about that as working as one mind, that probably comes through this, technological Neuralink that goes everywhere, right? That is going to be part of being in touch with the divine essence. But here's something interesting from the past with that makes a whole lot of sense when you understand their belief in the hive mind. When Israel had to go up against all of these giants and hybrid giants in the time of the Exodus, and that's why book 2 is so important for Christians, to get all the example of all of the giants and the size of these giants, and how difficult this was, is that there's no way without God's help that they were going to win against them. And anytime they tried, they got their butts kicked
Right.
without God, right? Well, they were able to walk up to these giants because they're in a state of discombobulation and panic. And they'd just be able to walk them up. They had to take their legs out to bring them down and then take the head. They just did it. It wasn't like it was this massive fight against them. They were discombobulated. And what God said he would do as one of the things to help them was to send out hornets before them. Well, the hornet is the natural enemy of the bee.
That's interesting.
I don't believe that's coincidence, that they use the allegory of the bee, and the hornets show up as the super weapon against the giants.
Right.
Jeez.
Isn't there a lot of Egyptian worship of bees as well, which is kind of funny too?
It's an ancient, and the Anjou will use like the fleur de lis in one side of the allegory, and the other side it's a bee.
Jeez. Right. Oh wow, that's crazy. It's so funny. Everything fits together. Everything kind of falls into place.
Yep.
It's really awesome. Gary, you did a great job, man. I thank you so much for giving us your time tonight. And hopefully we can get you in the future again, go over some more topics that you dive into, because I do think, with this whole New World Order concept, I do think that, the return of Atlantis is something that's going to play a part.
10 Kings of Atlantis.
Exactly. I know, man. And then that just goes into Revelation, and we're going to be here for another 2 hours, folks.
Yeah.
Strap back in. But Gary, just real quick for the audience, where they could find your work and your book and everything like that.
Yeah, so the best way to get a hold of me or to find my book is through my website, thegenesis6conspiracy.com. That's the number 6conspiracy.com. On the website, I have a generous excerpt of all 98 chapters of book 1 and all 84 chapters of book 2. And if you think that's most of the book, it's just a small drop in the bucket of each of the books. But it'll give you a good flavor, and I think just the table of contents will grab your interest. And if you're interested in getting a hold of me, there's a contact the author icon on the website. Also on the website is if you want to get a signed copy to support me. I don't accept donations, but if you like what I say or you're interested in my books after reading through some of the example chapters, then you can go to the Buy Now page. And there's 3 Buy Now pages. One has is Buy Now for book 1. Book 2 is page 2. Book 3 is the bundling page. And it's important to know that because if you wanted to buy both or multiples, there's discounts on each page, but you only can mix them on the one page. That's the bundling page, page 3. You can also link over to Amazon.com, Amazon.ca, BarnesandNoble.com to get the printed copy from those as well. So that's the fastest, easiest way to get a book either signed by me or from Amazon and Barnes and Noble. It's available on other retailers and website retailers as well, but those are the contacts I have up. If you wanted to get the digital version, you can link over directly from the website buy page to get the Kindle version. It goes right to the page, and also the Audible versions that came out. So that's the fastest, easiest way to get a hold of me. And if you want to ask me a question, yeah, contact the author. Be patient. It'll probably take me 2 to 3 months to get back to you.
Awesome, man. Awesome. Cool stuff, man. Real quick before we get into an episode debrief here in just a moment, Taylor's going to send you out in a prayer, and we'll wrap it up right after that.
Terrific.
Father God, thank you so much that we could have Brother Wayne here, and I just pray that you protect him and guide him and just bless him, Father God. And I just thank you that we could have all this knowledge and kind of share and connect and just tell the world like what's going on and all the lies that's going on and just expose the darkness that we're called to expose. And I just plead the blood of Jesus Christ over our viewers as well. And in Jesus Christ, I pray. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Wow, what an episode. Gary Wayne, everybody. Boom, another banger.
Bro.
Gary Wayne, everybody, author of Genesis 6 Conspiracy, book 1 and 2. Excited to finish the first one and super thrilled to get into the second one. He does a huge deep dive, ladies and gentlemen, into the bloodlines. I mean, all the way from secret societies to
really a deep
mystery
dive,
schools.
huh?
I mean, it really covers everything, man.
Dude.
Gary covers everything, man. What a blessing it is to get him on the show. He's got an awesome part 1, part 2 out there, folks. Check it out. If you'd like to read, if not,
get his audio.
Get his audio. Yeah, audio stuff. So, man, we got deep into the secret societies. It's so awesome how when I compared the secret societies to like a pyramid, he's like, no. He's like, it's like a what did he? A root or something?
Pine tree.
Or like a pine tree.
Or cedar.
No, cedar.
Same
Right. And how it branches off like that and stuff. It's so condensed, and compartmentalized, right?
Cedar.
Yep.
Cedar, dude.
Yep.
Look at these random scratch notes that I just kept going. He
almost tore the paper in half.
He had so many things, dude. The gnomes to the grays to the Stoichian, the Gamadians to the translate to the Gamad that translate to cubit, little foot soldiers, little people that were fighting at the tower to protect whomever. I can't remember what he said. I mean, I got to get into all that.
Well, this is going to come into play when we get into like, Lord of the Rings, Atlantis. Right. We're going to get into this next episode, and we're going to tie in what that's going to look like, maybe even in our day. Right. When he's talking about like this old religion is coming back, like it's coming back, bro. They're preparing us for something that's not only going to bring the world together, but it's going to bring religions together. It's going to it's going to be in this form to where it's going to sweep the world in like a vacuum, dude. And really the resistance, right? Like the people from Star, they put this in movies, right? There's always like this resistance. There's, the Terminator movies, there's the Matrix, then there's, Star Wars. Like there is this resistance, right? That stands up to some sort of authoritarian empire, right? Or in some sense. Doesn't always have to be in a way authoritarian, but in other ways it could be like bargaining. Like they bargain with you or something, where hey, you have to do this to do this, right? It's kind of we've seen that in our past. Very wild stuff. Gary, thank you so much, brother. Man, what'd you find interesting?
I mean,
I know the alien stuff at the end was
dude, that
almost
that
like
got me. I mean,
it almost restarted a whole new episode.
Dude, we just talked with him in the green room for like 20 minutes. I mean, we can just keep going on. I love how he broke down, the Nephilim were just simple stuff. The Nephilim were the giants before the flood. The Rephaim were the giants after the flood that were created in Sodom and Gomorrah, I believe, right? Or Sodom.
Well, there's a few theories, right, to the second incursion, right? So there is the Sodom and Gomorrah theory that's where that kind of did take place. I mean, it's mentioned in other places in the New Testament to kind of reference you back to, hey, there was like sexual acts going on. There were sexual acts being taken place in these cities, right? And what's fascinating is just watch the pattern. Watch the pattern how God reacts to abomination. Right? He reacts to it with judgment. Right. So when he destroys Sodom and Gomorrah with fire and brimstone, I mean, it only makes me think that, hey, there was something taking place in that episode right there, right? And that there's interaction with angels, almost in a way to where the nature of it at first is unaware, right? Like that we're dealing with angels that can masquerade in human nature and all this other kind of stuff. I think the angelic realm is more sophisticated than we give it credit for. And I even think what we know as the general populace, like it's not even 1% of what the angelic realm kind of consists of and all this kind of stuff. I mean, you get a lot of this information too, right, from ancient texts and things like that we can relate and at least get the characteristics of what it is we're looking at, right?
Right. Yeah, man, and that just tying back into the abominations and the fooling around with DNA. You look at these companies that are now blowing up, the colossal biosciences. They're creating anything they want from, as long as they have solid DNA that they can have. Like I think he said at least 10 or more specific parts of the DNA. Like if he can replicate.
I mean, even Joy was referencing it, right? Like last episode, that even just a one cell, right, is more or less like a copy of you.
Exactly.
Or they can retrieve a certain information that they need from it to make the DNA.
You think about Hillary Clinton getting the Gilgamesh's DNA or whatever she was doing in the Middle East. But what I'm saying with the biosciences, the colossal biosciences, that company, they're creating anything they want as long as they can have this, this tangible, specific set of DNA that you can get from any bone material on your body, pretty much. But they're open source. The company is open source.
Right.
So if you have the funding, just the funding, you can hire a group to do exactly what they're doing. But guess what you can do? You can take Lucy. You can take Lucy, the first whatever.
Right.
You can make her, or you can make a megalodon, or you can make anything. You get any.
Well,
DNA
Jurassic Park seems to be becoming more real in our day.
It's done.
Wild,
it's there.
bro.
We're here.
It's wild. Isn't it fascinating too how a lot of the agendas, right, and even just like the agendas that come off ethical but are evil, right? Because we can kind of understand that, right? Even just like the companies that are out there now, they're making their own ethics. they're creating their own
Right.
ethical boundaries now, because
Yeah.
they're coming to these circumstances to where, hey, like they're starting to like create life here. This is getting
Right.
serious. You know, ego and all, and even just the nature of humanity.
Same
right,
with
is
AI.
evil. It's evil. And so when it's going to get a hold of this kind of stuff, everything's revolving around genetics, man. It happened, you know, in the garden. It happened in Genesis 6. It's happening throughout the Bible. You've got bloodline stuff in there. I mean, there is importance to the genealogy of things. And now in our day, we're messing with it on a scientific level in a way how Gary was talking about. We're just kind of coming back, and the technology's coming back, right? Like the
Right.
technology's coming back, and to where it's almost like Ecclesiastes, right? You know, nothing changes under the sun, and you're going to get these these circular revolutions, to where this is just how humanity acts, and it's based off of influence, and the influencer here is the power of the prince of the air, and you've got the majority of the world is satanic, and it's just mushed up, man, and it's really, there is no going back. This is where how much acceleration do you want to put on the gas pedal at this point? You know, and we're going to see it. It's going to be like the days of Noah, things like this, right? I mean, even just little season eschatology things, something's going to be weird, right? With even just Revelation 20. Okay. Like something is going to be weird. There's going to be weird things that are taking place. Who knows what that's even going to look like, but I'm leaning more towards like this is like the Nephilim reborn,
right,
in some shape or form. And you know, these Nephilim, like they're craving inhabitation, like they want to inhabit something. It's going to be either, you know, a body that they can give them to, and I think that's why there's always this reincarnation process in a lot of these, you know, religions. And I think it's all fallen angel worship type stuff. But you know, I mean, what if we do see an Antichrist figure that, you know, endures an apotheosis ritual, and you've got this crazy understanding of your vision of what the Antichrist looks like, and it's got the alien agenda tied in with it. It's got AI tied in with it. It's got homunculus tied in with it. It's got occult spiritual worship rituals tied in with it. I think it's going to be a big shebang of that kind of stuff. But dude, banger episode. Loved it. Loved every minute of it, folks. Go check him out. If you've stuck with us this long, we appreciate you. We love you. If you haven't done so already, smash that subscribe button, like the show, share it with your friends, drop a comment down below. Please check us out on audio applications. Check us out on Spreaker. You can check us out on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. While you're there, leave us a 5-star review and drop a follow. But folks, that's it all. That's all we got for you folks tonight. We'll be back at you next Wednesday. Check us out on YouTube. And we're dropping episodes on YouTube every Wednesday and Saturday, 8 p.m. We premiere our episodes, so you can get visuals of the show there. And we release that morning on audio platforms. So you can get the uncensored, unedited audio episode that morning. And then you can come visit us later that night on YouTube. Check us out there.
Get in the live chat, have some fun.
Yep, hang out in the live chat, have some fun, and you know, become you know, just mix in with the community. And but folks, we love you. We're gonna see you next time. Be safe.
See you.